Questions of much graver and universal interest occupy our minds today.
Hello, my name is Lieutenant Eric Schein. I'm here to talk to you today about royalty. It is something that our founding fathers spent a great deal of time and energy confronting and fighting against, and we now find ourselves in the midst of a great number of self-appointed royal families here in the United States who have their ties and their lineage going all the way back to ancient empires and or civilizations, including England, Portugal, Spain, Italy, and most importantly, Austria, Bavaria, Germany, Liechtenstein, Switzerland, Poland, and you can even get into Ukraine, which is considered Little Russia, and Russia and the Baltic states. We've seen what's going on with Georgia right now. When you go and actually look into what Georgia is all about, this country has been there for quite some time. Even its folklore or history that Jason from the Argonauts actually went to Georgia, a former Soviet republic, and now soon to be a new Soviet republic possibly, to search for the Golden Fleece. And there are medieval castles and more in Georgia. But what we are feeling here in the United States is the resurgence and the repatriation and reconstitution of ancient royal families that come from not just these countries that I've mentioned, but also from the Middle East. We've all seen President Bush holding hands with the Prince Fahd from Saudi Arabia, and we all know that 15 of the 19 terrorists who were involved in 9/11 were from Saudi Arabia, a country that is a feudal state, a monarchy, as is Liechtenstein, as is tied to the Habsburgs and many of these ancient families who are using war, not just Afghanistan and Iraq, and soon to possibly be Iran and Georgia. This is clearly, I would say, a new, if not World War III, World War IV. Many people consider the Cold War World War III. We are seeing a resurgence, an intentional resurgence of these corporatists, these fascists, these ancient royal families who use war to fill their own coffers, to fill their own treasure houses, their own treasuries, all at the expense of 95% of the rest of the population. One of these families, not only Liechtenstein, from the country named Liechtenstein, another royal family, of course, but also Thyssen, T-H-Y-S-S-E-N, and Krupp, two families that are now intermarried with each other and also intermarried with the Habsburg family. These families, Thyssen and Krupp, were enormous manufacturers or industrialists, warship builders in Germany during World War II. They now have, after what we've seen with that, what has actually happened with 9/11 and the two World Trade Center buildings, the main buildings coming down and building number 7, ThyssenKrupp, a German corporation with very ancient, if not royal roots, much like Royal Dutch Shell and BP, which is an offshoot of Royal Dutch Shell, now has not only major contracts and business dealings here in the United States, but has the contract for the new Freedom Tower, for the new World Trade Center. And when you start to look into everything that has gone on, it's not just ThyssenKrupp, and the corporations and business dealings that they have now here within the United States, and the fact that they are of German origin, and not German American or American German, but German and Royal German origination. You start to look into what these families have been up to, and ThyssenKrupp has been involved in a South African arms deal in 1999, one of its subsidiaries, involving submarines, corvettes, and the sale of other weapons. It's tied to, interestingly enough, a place called Frankenstein. But when you start to look into the ties to the Rothschilds, the De Beers, even to see the ties like President Clinton, and I would show that Ronald Reagan was knighted by the Queen of England. So was George Herbert Walker Bush. So was Henry Kissinger. And Kissinger was born in Bavaria, was raised to a certain age in London, and his affinity has been for everything foreign and everything royal, and people need to differentiate between the common man, which is what our Constitution did. It took the Magna Carta out of the hands of the barons and princes and the kings and the royal families and put it into the hands of the common folk, you and I. Not only was Kissinger knighted by the Queen, as were the other people that I mentioned, George Herbert Walker Bush, Ronald Reagan, so was Alan Greenspan, and you can see what Alan Greenspan has done to the United States, as Kissinger has as well, and our name around the world. But so was Colin Powell, and Colin Powell is the individual who sat upon the documents and information about the My Lai massacre in Vietnam and was promoted for that. Also Norman Schwarzkopf, Rudy Giuliani, Mr. 9/11, all of these individuals have been knighted by the Queen of England, and our founding fathers, with all of their faults and whatever faults they may have crafted into our system by accident, stood against nobility in its entirety, in any and all forms. And they fought not only to include that, the fact that they detested self-appointed royal families. In our state and in our federal constitutions, the 14th Amendment was to originally be the Titles of Nobility Act, and then we were soon embroiled within the Civil War. J.P. Morgan, the individual who came to the United States before our Civil War, our first Civil War. Many say that we're in a Civil War now, and they are setting up the very same parameters, and this is about capturing and recolonizing the United States and selling off our public trust and enslaving our people. But J.P. Morgan came to the United States prior to our Civil War. He helped incite our Civil War, helped fund both sides of our Civil War, and profited from both sides of our Civil War, and took down American financial houses here in the United States with the help of his father and the backing of his father, who was an English banker who was backed by the Crown family in England. And when you start to look at this, and look to even people like Rupert Murdoch, who has his own ties, and this you can find on even Wikipedia, and don't trust everything that is in Wikipedia, but this is accurate. Rupert Murdoch's ties to the royal crown families is obvious. It's extremely clear, as are individuals like Stephen Gyllenhaal of Hollywood fame, writer, director, producer. He has been ennobled, made a person of nobility by the Swedish royal crown family. Shell Oil Company, ties to Queen Beatrix, who owns a majority stake in or a controlling interest in Shell Oil, that was founded by Royal Charter, British Petroleum, that is an offshoot of Shell. So you see that the royal families own and control, if you look at even our North Slope oil in Alaska, the royal families from Europe, and not just Germany, but the Netherlands as well, own and control a majority stake of our resources and assets here in our country, and whether it's time for a new declaration of independence, and not just energy independence, but independence in all regards from these self-appointed royal families, you need to look to those in positions of power, even within the Senate and Congress, who have either been in position for too long themselves and are beholding to themselves as a self-made royal family. Congressman Duncan Hunter, who was recently running for as a presidential candidate in the recent or ongoing elections, tried to set up his son to take over his congressional seat. That goes to feudalism, royalism, familialism, to where you want to extend the reach of your family through public office, just like kings and queens and princes and barons and dukes, to where your rights are secured by title. And when you think about this, it's not our meritocracy here in the United States is under attack. The Merit Systems Protection Board, Office of Personnel Management, the Office of Special Counsel, what Scott Block has been up to, all of these systems, now even the structure of our state and federal government, the Administrative Procedure Act, which is intended for state and federal agencies to cure their own internal problems through remediation, through remedial actions, where it does not take any life, liberty, or property away, are now using these systems as privy councils or star chambers or witch trials of sorts here in the United States. Start to look up and read on Star Chamber, Privy Council. You can go to or even our own Salem witch trials if you want a good example of how these trials work. Just like in the witch trials, where they would dunk an individual who was accused of being a witch. If they floated, they were guilty, which, laws of physics and all, most people are going to float. They would be burned at the stake. If they sank, they drowned and were dead to rights, but they were innocent. Either way, they were dead. This is the kind of system that these neocons and the Bushites have set up within our country. They are bringing in this program of, and when you look to these individuals and the ties, President Bush, not only being knighted by the Queen, Queen Elizabeth is tied to the Habsburgs, as are the Bush family. When you start to look at the majority of our presidents here in the United States, they are related to not just each other, but royal families from Europe, and most importantly, the Habsburgs, who have controlled for the last 900 years through one means or mechanism or machination or another, much of the politics in Europe, even to the point of being on the councils that helped form the European Economic Community that later devolved into and became the European Union, which is the same thing through NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, which is being attempted here in the United States. And as President Bush has said, oceans no longer separate us, to where those countries in Europe that used to be empires, including England, and they are trying to set up or reestablish the United Kingdom, with England as the central port or hub for the rest of the world, but as controlled from Austria, Bavaria, Germany, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, the Netherlands, and more. The Hague is a central factor in this. The World War II and what the Nazis were up to, the corporatist, fascist, Martin Bormann, who was executive director to Adolf Hitler, deputy Führer, I believe, he worked to outsource with Nazi factions over the capital and intellectual property and the people from these royal families or corporatists or industrialists, and export the capital and everything tied to it of over 750 corporate families from the German Empire before it fell. And these families have moved throughout not just the United States, but the rest of the world, and they are now reclaiming control, bringing it back to this region. and we need to stand strong and stand independent, more so now than at any time in our history. The rest of the world depends upon it because the European Union is using us as a surrogate to set up a war between, and a major conflict, and this is not going to be a Cold War, between Russia, the former Soviet Union, its satellite states, Balkan states, you can see what's going on in Georgia, and the United States as tied into and possibly including and incorporating the European Union. The French invaded Russia and were not successful. The Germans attempted to invade Russia and were not successful. Russia has held the line for quite some time, and whether you want to call them communist or socialist or, the USSR was formed as the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. They were republics in a different light. They interpreted the ancient works, the Greeks and others, differently than here in the United States and our own founding fathers to an extent. There's a lot more similarities than many care to imagine. But this is being set up as the foreign boogeyman so that not only can power be reinvigorated and reinforced in the old Soviet Union and the royal families there. When you look to Putin and his background and who he's connected to, you'll see the royal ties. But the same thing here in the United States, so that just like J. Edgar Hoover did in the 40s and 50s, and other individuals, McCarthy as well, they can use these external conflicts to oppress and suppress rights and freedoms here in the United States. And I've seen this firsthand, where now the Coast Guard, under the Department of Homeland Security, has taken military law, Uniform Code of Military Justice, out of the Department of Defense, Title 10, moved it into Homeland Security. The Coast Guard is now saying and claiming that they are a full-time branch of military that they are not. We're not created to be. We're not made by Congress to be a branch of military, especially separate and apart from the Department of Defense and the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the chair of the Joint Chiefs. Right now, Admiral Allen, who is married to Pamela Hess, and we had the Hessians here in our own country during the Revolutionary War. This is the same individuals from an area called Hesse. Saxony is another area, Anglo-Saxons. The Anglo-Saxons came into and built the original London Bridge and were followed up by the Romans when it was rebuilt. These ancient civilizations, these ancient cultures, these ancient families from these regions are coming into and playing games in our internal politics here in the United States, and they are taking down our country from within. People need to forget, the Middle East has a part in this too. The kings of Jerusalem, the kings of Antioch, the kings of Europe, and even places like Georgia, Bulgaria, throughout that entire region, much of the cradles of civilization from all the different ethnicities from all around the world that have come to the United States as the melting pot, hopefully to face this, whether it be Europe, Africa, the Middle East, Eurasia, Asia. These very same families have been carrying this on for thousands of years, and now they are all working together, hand in hand, to oppress and suppress 95% of the rest of the population, and to use things like global warming, whether it's real or not. They are capturing the concept, they are capturing the problem, whether real or perceived, and using it. And you can see the moment in the movie Mel Gibson came out with recently, Apocalypto, where the king of the, I believe it was the Aztecs or the Mayans, I believe it was the Aztecs, in the movie, they used the lunar eclipse that they knew was coming, used this knowledge against the people. They knew it was going to happen, and they used it to carry on a sacrifice of some estimate, it was as many as 70,000 of their own citizens or civilians, and those taken from rural areas around the temples, and sacrificed them. before the lunar eclipse. The very same thing is going on now. It may not look the same, it may not feel the same, but we are sacrificing our own men and women and children on the altar of war so that these royal families can continue to live off of the backs of 90 to 95% of the rest of the population and suppress our rights, take away not only our voting rights. If you look into things like even the Electoral College, how it was created and what it was created for, you start to better understand how they have corrupted everything about our system and are working on it on a religious basis, no pun intended, to take down our country because they cannot stand the rule of law. They want to enforce and impose the rule of man, individuals, which is arbitrary and capricious, that they do not have to answer to. They believe that they have some type of a divine right to rule over the rest of us. And it is time once again to stand up, to stand tall, to push back not only on the corporations, but who are backing the corporations and breaking down state lines, national lines, attacking and even creating entire populations and civilizations as a market or commodity to be traded, just like the royal families did in the medieval ages in Europe and throughout the last several thousand years in Europe and the Middle East and in Africa, to where these individuals would attack their own people. Even Attila the Hun and Genghis Khan did this. They knew that the best way to marshal their troops, to turn their citizens into soldiers, was to attack them themselves. And that is exactly what is going on here in the United States. It is economic warfare being carried out by individuals like Greenspan, who is representing royal interest, royal foreign interest. Kissinger as well. Look into his background. Even people like Gyllenhaal, who may not understand or know what he has done in accepting a title of nobility from a foreign royal family. He has not only set himself up as a noble here in the United States in one of our industries, or they have set him up, but now his son and daughter are a prince and princess of this industry. And when you see this, good jobs, whether they be as a writer, director, producer, or as actors, are being taken over and held by self-appointed royal families who have no interest whatsoever in the rest of the population. They see us that we are here to serve them, to live and die for them, so that they can live in a free society that we were all intended to live in. And if you take things like WD-40, and I know this sounds, but follow me here. WD-40 is water displacement formula number 40. It was created by tax dollars here in the United States. Fine, I don't have a problem with a family taking that product from the treasure house of the United States, of the people, of the Commonwealth, making a corporation and bringing that product to market and making a living off of it, a good living. But user fees, intellectual property fees, R&D money should go back into the United States to create more products like that, to give others an opportunity, not just to create a royal family. This is how the fascists use it. They use not only regulations like Chrysler and Ford using the Department of Transportation to go ahead and keep out small manufacturers, not just like Tucker, and many people have seen the movie, but you can go through the whole history. We should not have a General Motors. We should not have a Ford here in the United States. You've seen what they've become. They come in, they consolidate the jobs. They put them in one place to where you have a manufacturing facility to make vehicles for the entire nation, let alone many other countries, if not the entire planet. You have a very few select group of families that are tied to a very few select group of other families. Less than 200 families sit on the boards of most companies and corporations, international and otherwise, here in the United States and abroad. DuPont's, Rothschilds, Liechtenstein. Liechtenstein, it's a royal family. I mean, you can't get any more blatant than that. Queen Elizabeth, the amount of land and property that she owns here in the United States goes to the levels of oppression, the denial of the ability to have an honest, decent union here in the United States that is not controlled overwhelmingly or even run by the employers or the federal government. This all goes to the issues of royalty. We have, initially the Roberts sons come into the United States and start to feel out and find a place where they can get a toehold. And then shortly thereafter, we have individuals, the Roberts or Roberts, come in after them to step up the lineage of these ancient royal families. And when you look at Alito and Roberts, and even people like Scalia, the Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, his father was the president of the American Fascist Society. American President Lines is tied to Hamburg America Lines, the Bush family. American President Lines was the premier flag carrier, American flag shipping company here in the United States. And shortly after World War II, we were the premier flag carrier for the world. We had more ships and more tonnage. Right now, 97% of all cargo coming into the United States is carried on foreign flag vessels. These are being carried out as economic attacks upon the United States, things that Jefferson understood well, and even Hamilton. And many people believe that Hamilton was beholding more to the royal families. And that was an issue with Aaron Burr and Tammany Hall and the Democratic Republicans. We used to have, and we've seen where they're using the Republicans against the Democrats. The Republicans have become a party, and I was a former Republican, went to a military academy, naval officer and more, to where this Republican Party has become a party of the kingmakers, where they believe that we elect a king for 4 to 8 years, and they would like to see that 8-year limitation that the Republicans put on many years ago removed. And we need to watch this because the 22nd Amendment may be overturned during this election cycle, and we need to be aware. Thank you. Think about it. Royal families.
Questions of much graver and universal interest occupy our minds today. Questions of much graver.